thank you to all the organizer, Eurosatory, Association of the US Army, for helping us host this event. It's really fascinating to be here once again. So yeah, strategic land power for the 21st century. It's a big question that we're asking here today. In France, we have strategic air forces operated by the French Air Force. We have an oceanic strategic force operated by the French Navy, but we have no strategic land forces. This is obviously linked with the nuclear deterrent dimension to that, as French land forces no longer possess a nuclear strike capability. And actually, even when they used to have this nuclear strike capability, it was never considered as strategic, or at least labeled as strategic. It was pre-strategic, last warning capability, and that was due to its reduced yield and range. Therefore, this raises a question. Can we assess the strategic value of a unit, a service, a branch, by only taking into account the quantity of firepower it can yield and or the range to which it can take it? Of course, according to me, the answer is no. Strategy, as General Beaufort would state, strategy is the art of a dialectic of two opposing will using force to resolve their dispute. In more plain words, with every respect to General Beaufort, is when basically we use military means and they have a direct impact on political outcome and on political objective. And surely history has shown that there are plenty ways to do that other than with a nuclear weapon. In its last strategic review, published in late 2017, the French government reaffirmed the existence of 5 big strategic functions, of which only one is directly related to nuclear deterrence. The other 4 are protection, anticipation, prevention, and intervention. And I believe the United States Department of Defense counts 6 types of military activities, which would also qualify as strategic and cross over much of the French ones. And these are shape, deter, seize initiative, dominate, stabilize, and then enable. Whether in the French 5 or in the American 6, you will find plenty of strategic actions that will require ground forces for the unique features to be realized, such as these unique features could be physical persistence, for instance, discriminating terrain control, interaction with complex human domain, and maybe the most important of all is the acceptation of risk and therefore unequivocal demonstration of political will. And this is very, very much specific to land forces. This last point, for instance, plays a big part in the ground forces' contribution even to deterrence, to the credibility of nuclear deterrence, without themselves having to yield any of such weapons. To put things clearly, if you put people on the ground, it means that you're ready to pay the blood price, and therefore you make your escalation threats more credible. Such a tripwire logic has led NATO to deploy the enhanced forward presence force in the Baltics to send Russia a very clear message that it could not fail to understand. If you tread here, you'll have to roll over soldiers from all over the alliance. You might have the strength, the military strength to do it, but you won't escape the consequence of doing it. Despite all this usefulness, land forces, one has to admit, have been eroded in the 1990s and the 2000s decades by some decision makers who thought that they could get away somehow with fewer and fewer boots on the ground while focusing on the command of the commons, as has been labeled by Barry Posen. Western hard power was then backed by military of the revolution in military affairs, military transformation doctrine, which rely mostly on some sort of a ISR strike complex, mostly relying on airborne, spaceborne, and to a lesser extent seaborne technology. But over the last 20 years, experience has shown that the command of the commons was not enough to secure a strategic outcome to, say, our interventions, but not only interventions. Even the less capable of our adversaries found ways to evade or even to suppress Western air, sea, and space power through either dissimulation, imbrication, dematerialization of their command and control. And then you have hybrid threats coming into the picture, and they have a greater pack of capabilities. They have manpads, anti-ship guided missiles, drones, jamming devices, and they were able to go even further and sometimes seriously hinder our deployments in the global commons. And then finally you have the upper tier of the spectrum with regional powers who've been investing in disruptive anti-access area denial capabilities, who've been denying and increasing the number of denied areas throughout the globe. And so we see Western supremacy, or at least Western command of the commons, which is growing more and more contested, and the impact of that on land forces is going to be huge. Indeed, ever since the first offset strategy, Western forces have been willing to trade off manpower for technology and land power for more standoff capabilities. Armies, of course, have always depended on air and naval forces to access a theater whenever this theater implied a transition between two physical domains. But today, this reliance goes much further than just access. Now, contemporary land power depends on air, sea, space, and even cyberspace domains for most of its activities. Command and control, ISR, tactical lift, closeout support, and so on and so forth. Not to mention what were to happen if tomorrow, say, our fighter bombers, or J-stars, or SATCOM, or AWACS, not to mention our cargo aircraft or helicopter carrier ships were to be denied the access to the theater, or were just to be less available to support our ground forces just because they are busy fighting for superiority in their own domain. Well, it will have, according to me, a huge impact on the military efficiency of ground forces. Now, what would we do with that? Answer will come, I think, from two lines of effort which might seem contradictory but are in fact complementary. These are autonomy and collaborative combat. As far as autonomy is concerned, one needs to distinguish between offensive and defensive autonomy. Offensive autonomy means recovering capabilities and capacities which have been degraded over the last decades, such as organic fire support, that includes long-range artillery, military engineers crossing capabilities, for instance. Or as far as France is concerned, I think long overdue gap in heavy helicopters. That is a big gap we have in the French army, despite all the great helicopters that we have. We lack a heavy helicopter transport capability. Defensive autonomy now means increasing land forces' reliance on survivability and increasing their survivability on the battlefield. That involved hardening systems, continued investment in new reactive armor, but also active defense, of course, which include organic surface-to-air capabilities to counter potential enemy air threats, something that we somehow had forgot. And we recently seen in Iraq and Syria with ISIS drones that enemy air capability and threat to our ground forces is no longer an hypothesis. It's actual happening in operations, and we're taking casualties from this. One should also reinvest in deception tactics, radio silence, a lot of different tactics that we somehow have forgot to. Finally, defensive autonomy implies, of course, a huge effort in securing our comms and data link, especially as we making progress in more comms and more digitalization. And with this respect, the French Army Scorpion system is directly at stake here. We need to have this as secure as possible, because threat and enemy electronic warfare and cyber attacks is growing more and more threatening every day, and we've seen the lessons learned from the war in eastern Ukraine to that respect. Finally, collaborative combat, or as the US Army called it, multi-domain battle, needs to be developed as a new horizon for operational art. And I deeply think that this is not just another label for joint warfare or comprehensive approach. The stake here is to forego the supporting dilemma which has plagued the joint warfare for decades now. As ground forces will grow more autonomous, I think that they will find that they are not only joint effect consumers, they are also joint effect providers. An example of that, historical example, is the Israeli use of long-range artillery during the Yom Kippur War in 1973 to destroy Egyptian surface-to-air missile systems. That was a pretty interesting land-based suppression of enemy air defense mission. So I think that if we take this whole new dimension which is opening now of land forces benefiting from, other domains, but also helping other domains to benefit from the land domain, we entering a new world of joint maneuver and make room from a renewal of maneuver warfare. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave you there and wait for your question. Thank you for listening.